The ultrasound gel was still cold on my belly when I realized something was wrong with my marriage. Not with the baby. Thank God. The baby was perfect, growing exactly as expected at 22 weeks. The technician had smiled as she pointed out tiny fingers and toes, the strong heartbeat echoing through the room like a promise of new life. But as I lay there, staring at the grainy black and white image of our daughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Maybe it was the way David had barely looked at the screen during the appointment, his fingers drumming impatiently against his thigh, or how he'd immediately stepped outside to take a work call the moment we were done, leaving me to handle the scheduling of our next appointment alone. After 6 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the subtle signs of his disinterest, but this felt different, colder. I gathered my purse and the ultrasound photos, tucking them carefully into the manila envelope the clinic provided. Our daughter's first pictures. I wanted to frame them, put them on the refrigerator, call my mother. But David was already halfway to his car, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying across the parking lot in animated conversation with whoever was more important than witnessing his daughter's first portrait. "I'll meet you at home," I called out, but he was already driving away. The 20-minute drive to our suburban home gave me time to rationalize his behavior. David was under pressure at the law firm, a partnership decision was coming up, and he'd been working late most nights. The pregnancy hadn't been planned, and while he'd said all the right things about being excited, his actions told a different story. But we were in this together, weren't we? We'd figure it out like we always did. I pulled into our driveway to find his BMW already there, parked at an odd angle as if he'd been in a hurry. The front door was unlocked, and I could hear voices coming from the living room. David's familiar baritone and another voice that made my stomach clench with recognition. Melissa. My best friend since college, the one who'd been my maid of honor, who came over for wine and complained about her string of failed relationships while I offered advice and tissues. She was supposed to be at work. She managed a boutique downtown and rarely took afternoons off. I set my purse down quietly in the entryway, something instinctive telling me to listen before announcing my presence. Their voices were coming from the living room, hushed but intense. "Can't keep doing this, David. She's going to figure it out eventually." "She won't. Sarah's too trusting, too focused on the pregnancy. Besides, she thinks you're her best friend." The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my back against the wall, my hand instinctively moving to protect my growing belly. But what happens when the baby comes? You can't seriously think we can continue this with a newborn in the house. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." David's voice carried a note of frustration I recognized from our arguments. "We need to make a decision. Either I leave her now, before the baby comes, or we end this, and I commit to being a father and husband." There was a long pause, and when Melissa spoke again, her voice was softer, pleading. "You know what I want, David. We've been talking about this for months. I love you. I've loved you since before she even met you, remember? College, sophomore year, that party at the Kappa house. You kissed me first. My knees nearly buckled. Sophomore year. That was before David and I had even started dating. Had they been carrying on some kind of emotional affair for over 8 years? I remember. David's voice was gentler now. But Sarah got pregnant, Mel. Everything changed. Everything changed when you married her. Melissa shot back, and I could hear her moving around the room. I've watched you two together for 6 years, David. You're not happy. You haven't been happy for a long time. And now with the baby? The baby changes everything, he repeated, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Does it? Or does it just trap you in something that was already broken? I felt tears burning my eyes, but beneath the hurt was something else. A cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. How long had this been going on? How many times had Melissa sat at my kitchen table listening to me worry about David's late nights at work, offering comfort while she was the reason for my husband's emotional distance? She trusts you completely, David was saying. It almost makes it worse how good she is. She doesn't deserve this. Then leave her. Melissa's voice turned sharp. File for divorce. Pay your child support. We can start over, David. We can have the life we should have had all along. I heard the soft sound of movement, fabric rustling, and realized they were embracing. In my living room, in the home I'd spent years making perfect for us, choosing furniture and paint colors and throw pillows that would reflect our life together. My phone buzzed with a text message, the sound unnaturally loud in the hallway. I quickly silenced it, but the voices in the living room had stopped. Did you hear something? Melissa whispered. Sarah's still at the appointment, David replied, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I had maybe 30 seconds before they came to investigate. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped back outside, closing the door with the same soft click it had made when I entered. My hands were shaking as I got back in my car and drove around the block, my mind racing. 22 weeks pregnant, and my husband was planning to leave me for my best friend. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't even process the full scope of it yet. But as I sat in my car at the end of our street, watching our house through my rear-view mirror, the shock began to crystallize into something much more dangerous. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was too trusting, too focused on the pregnancy to notice what was happening right under my nose. And maybe I had been, but not anymore. I waited 15 minutes before driving back home. Melissa's car was gone, and David was in his study, door closed, presumably on a work call. I went upstairs to our bedroom and lay down, ultrasound photos spread across my chest, staring at the ceiling and planning. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored: David's phone habits, his schedule, the way he interacted with Melissa during the few times she came over. I installed a tracking app on his phone when he was in the shower, telling myself I just needed to know the truth. I went through his credit card statements and found charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels during business trips I now realized he'd never taken a loan. The evidence painted a picture that was even worse than I'd imagined. They'd been having an affair for over a year, maybe longer. Intimate dinners, weekend getaways, a whole secret relationship that existed parallel to my marriage. Melissa had been lying to my face every single time she came over, every time she hugged me and asked about the baby, every time she complained about being single while sleeping with my husband. But the worst discovery came when I found David's laptop left open on his desk. Their email correspondence went back 18 months, filled with declarations of love, discussions about their future together, and detailed complaints about me. I was boring, according to David. Predictable. I'd let myself go after we got married, becoming too comfortable, too focused on domestic things like decorating and cooking. Melissa agreed enthusiastically. She'd always thought David was too good for me, she wrote. She'd been waiting for him to realize it. The final straw came in an email dated just 2 days after our ultrasound appointment. The appointment was torture, watching her get so excited about something that's just going to complicate everything. She wants to name the baby Charlotte, after her grandmother, of course. Always about her family, her traditions. I can't do this for 18 years, Mel. I can't pretend to be happy about a life I never wanted. You don't have to, came Melissa's reply. We've talked about this. There are ways to handle it. Divorce doesn't have to be ugly if she doesn't fight it. And if she does, well, there are things we know about her that might make her more agreeable to a quick, quiet split. Things they knew about me? I read that line over and over, trying to understand what they could possibly mean. What secrets did they think they had? It didn't matter. They'd made their position clear. They were planning to destroy my life, and they thought I was too stupid and weak to fight back. They were wrong. I'd never considered myself a particularly vindictive person, but pregnancy hormones and betrayal make for a dangerous combination. As I sat in David's study, reading email after email detailing their affair and their plans for my future, I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. They wanted to play games. They wanted to manipulate and scheme and treat me like an obstacle to their happiness. Fine. I could play games too. The plan came to me slowly over several sleepless nights. It had to be perfect. Not just revenge, but justice. They'd stolen over a year of my life, made me question my own instincts, lied to me every single day. They'd planned to take my husband, break up my family, and apparently had some kind of backup plan to use against me if I didn't cooperate quietly. I started with their workplaces. David's law firm took ethics violations very seriously. There had been a partner forced to resign just last year for having an affair with a client. While Melissa wasn't a client, I had documentation of David using firm resources, his company credit card, his business email account, to conduct their affair. That was definitely against company policy. Melissa's boutique was owned by a conservative Christian woman who'd made it clear that she expected her employees to represent family values. The owner, Mrs. Henderson, was also a close friend of Melissa's mother. But those were just preliminary moves. The real plan was much more comprehensive. I hired a private investigator, not to gather evidence I already had, but to help me understand the legal implications of what I'd discovered and to ensure I had everything documented properly. Julia Martinez was a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases, and when I showed her the evidence I'd gathered, she whistled low. "Honey, you don't need me. You need a lawyer. This is going to be a very expensive divorce for your husband." "I don't want his money," I told her. "I want something else." Over the next week, Julia helped me understand exactly how much leverage I had. The adultery was bad enough, but David's use of firm resources made it a potential criminal matter. More importantly, several of their assignations had taken place in our home while I was at work, which could be considered a form of emotional abuse under our state's laws. "You could probably get a restraining order against both of them," Julia explained. "And with the pregnancy, the courts are going to be very sympathetic to you." But I didn't want sympathy. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to have your life destroyed by people you trusted. The first domino fell on a Tuesday. I'd been tracking David's location, and I knew he was meeting Melissa for lunch at their favorite restaurant, an intimate little place downtown where they probably thought they'd never be seen. I'd made sure they wouldn't be, but not for the reasons they hoped. I'd sent an anonymous email to David's senior partner, complete with photographs from the private investigator showing David and Melissa entering and leaving the restaurant, along with credit card receipts showing the firm's card being used for their romantic lunches. The email included a timestamp showing these meetings occurred during billable hours when David was supposedly working on client matters. The confrontation happened that afternoon. David came home ashen-faced, his tie loosened, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Sarah, we need to talk." I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been researching cribs, the picture of an innocent pregnant wife. "Of course. How was work?" He sat down heavily on the couch across from me. "I've been suspended pending an investigation. Someone sent photos of me and Melissa to the firm." "Oh my God," I gasped, my hand flying to my chest in perfectly performed shock. "Photos? What kind of photos?" "Nothing inappropriate," he said quickly. "Just us having lunch. But they're saying I used the company card for personal expenses, and that I was conducting personal business during work hours. Were you? I asked innocently. He looked at me sharply, and for a moment I wondered if he suspected. But then his shoulders sagged, and I realized he was too consumed with his own crisis to really see me. It's complicated, Sarah. There are things about my relationship with Melissa that, look, I need to tell you something. Here it comes, I thought. The confession. The moment where he'd try to control the narrative, paint himself as the victim of overwhelming passion, make me the understanding wife who'd forgive him for the sake of our family. We've been close. Closer than we should have been. I never meant for it to happen, but with the stress of the pregnancy and the partnership decision, I've been leaning on her for support. I let the silence stretch between us, watching him squirm. Finally, I spoke. Are you having an affair with my best friend, David? The directness of the question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked down at his hands. I love you, Sarah. You have to know that. But yes, Melissa and I have. We've developed feelings for each other. Feelings, I repeated flatly. I know how it sounds. I know it's wrong. But it happened gradually, and now I don't know what to do, especially with the baby coming. I stood up, my hands resting on my belly, and walked to the window. Our neighbor was mowing his lawn, the ordinary suburban scene at odds with the destruction happening in our living room. How long? I asked. Sarah? How long, David? About a year, he said quietly. A year. Not 18 months like the email suggested, but close enough. He was still lying, still trying to minimize it. I see. I turned back to face him. And what do you want to do about it? He looked genuinely surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, do you want to work on our marriage? Or do you want to be with Melissa? He stopped, clearly not expecting to have to articulate his choice so directly. I want what's best for everyone, for you, for the baby, for Melissa. That's not an answer. I think. He took a deep breath. I think maybe we should separate. Just temporarily, while I figure things out. The stress of the partnership, the pregnancy, this situation with Melissa. It's all too much right now. There it was. Not the honest confession I might have respected, but the coward's way out. A temporary separation that would become permanent once he'd figured out how to extricate himself from our marriage with minimal damage to his reputation and finances. I think that's probably best, I said calmly. His relief was visible. Really? You're okay with that? I'm not okay with any of this, David. But I need time to think too. And I can't do that with you here, knowing that you're in love with someone else. I never said I was in love with her. I gave him a look that made him flush and look away. You didn't have to. We spent the next hour working out the logistics. He'd stay at his brother's place, at least initially. We'd tell people he was working on a big case and needed space to focus. We'd revisit the situation after the baby was born. All lies, of course. David thought he was buying time to figure out how to transition from our marriage to a life with Melissa. What he was actually doing was giving me the space I needed to implement the rest of my plan. He packed a bag that evening, kissing my forehead with what I'm sure he thought was tender regret. I'm sorry, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. I lied. After he left, I sat in our suddenly silent house and called Melissa. Sarah. How are you feeling? How's the little one? Her voice was bright with false cheer, and I wondered how she'd managed to fake concern for me all these months. I'm okay. Actually, I'm calling because David and I have decided to separate for a while. Silence. Then, oh my God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. What happened? He told me about you too. Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different. smaller. Sarah, It's okay, I said gently. I mean, it's not okay, but I understand. These things happen. People fall in love. You, you're not angry? I'm hurt. I'm devastated. But I'm not angry at you. This was perhaps the biggest lie I'd ever told, but I needed her to believe it. You didn't mean for this to happen any more than David did. I don't know what to say. She was crying now, and part of me wondered if the tears were real or performative. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I know, and that I don't hate you. You're still my best friend, Melissa. That doesn't change just because you fell in love with my husband. Sarah. Her voice broke. You're being so much kinder than I deserve. Maybe. But I need kindness right now, not drama. I need to focus on the baby, on figuring out what comes next. Can I count on you for that? Of course. Of course. Anything you need. Good. Because I'm going to need support getting through this, and you know me better than anyone. We talked for another 10 minutes, with me playing the role of the gracious, heartbroken wife, and Melissa playing the guilt-ridden best friend. By the time I hung up, I could practically hear her relief. She thought I was going to make this easy for them. She was wrong. The next morning, I called David's brother, Mark. Sarah, how are you doing? David told me about everything. I'm managing. Actually, I'm calling because I'm worried about David. Has he seemed different to you lately? Before all this happened, I mean? Different how? I don't know. Anxious, maybe? Paranoid? He's been saying some strange things, and with the stress of the partnership decision. I let the sentence hang, planting seeds of doubt. Mark was a therapist, and I knew he'd be sensitive to any suggestion that his brother might be struggling with mental health issues. What kind of strange things? He's been very suspicious lately. Accusing me of things, checking my phone, following me sometimes. And he's been talking about people at work being out to get him, trying to sabotage his partnership bid. This was all fictional, but it would serve my purpose. When the investigation at David's firm intensified, when more evidence of his misconduct came to light, Mark would remember this conversation and wonder if David's judgment had been compromised by stress. The second domino fell 3 days later. Mrs. Henderson, the boutique owner, received an anonymous package containing printed emails between David and Melissa, their explicit discussions of their affair, and photographs of Melissa leaving what the documentation identified as David's brother's apartment at 7 in the morning. Melissa was fired that afternoon. She called me, sobbing. Sarah, something terrible has happened. Someone's been following me, documenting my relationship with David. Mrs. Henderson saw everything. I've lost my job. Oh no, I breathed. Who would do something like that? I don't know. David thinks maybe it's someone from his firm, trying to destroy his reputation. But why would they come after me? Maybe they thought targeting you would hurt him more than going after him directly, I suggested. You know how vindictive lawyers can be. This is a nightmare, she whispered. My parents. My mother is friends with Mrs. Henderson. She's going to find out about all of this. I'm so sorry, Mel. Is there anything I can do? No, I needed to hear a friendly voice. David is talking about leaving town, starting over somewhere else. Maybe that's what we need to do. Leaving town. That was interesting. It suggested they were more rattled than I'd expected. That seems drastic, I said carefully. Maybe. But his firm is conducting a full investigation now. They're looking at all his cases, all his expenses, everything. And with me losing my job, maybe a fresh start is what we need. What about the baby? A long pause. David. David will still support the baby, of course. But maybe it would be better for everyone if we weren't here, complicating things for you. Translation: they thought they could run away and leave me holding the bag. David would send child support checks from whatever new city they landed in, and I'd be left to raise our daughter alone, branded as the wife who couldn't keep her husband happy. If that's what you think is best, I said softly. But I had no intention of letting them escape that easily. The third domino was the most complex. Through Julia, I'd learned that David had been systematically hiding assets in preparation for our eventual divorce. Money transferred to accounts I didn't know about, investments made in his name only, even our house, which had been put into an LLC he'd created without my knowledge. All of this was illegal under our state's community property laws, and it painted a picture of a man who'd been planning to leave his pregnant wife for quite some time. But more importantly, it gave me leverage. I had Julia compile a comprehensive report documenting everything: the affair, the misuse of firm resources, the hidden assets, the pattern of deception. Then I had her deliver it to 3 different people: David's senior partner at the law firm, a judge friend of my father's who specialized in family law, and a reporter at the local newspaper who covered legal misconduct cases. The story broke on a Friday morning with the headline, "Local Attorney Under Investigation for Ethics Violations and Financial Misconduct." The article didn't mention the affair directly, but it laid out the case for David's professional misconduct in devastating detail. By noon, David's phone was ringing constantly. By evening, Melissa was at my door. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes red from crying, her usually perfect makeup smeared and faded. She pushed past me into the house without being invited, her movements frantic. "You did this," she said, without preamble. "You're behind all of it." "Behind what?" I asked, settling carefully into my favorite armchair. At 26 weeks pregnant, I was showing significantly, and I used my condition like armor, projecting vulnerability even as I felt more powerful than I ever had in my life. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. The photos, the emails to David's firm, the story in the paper. You've been planning this." "I don't know what you mean." She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "You know exactly what I mean. Saint Sarah, the perfect wife, the victim. But you're not, are you? You're vindictive and manipulative, and you've been playing us this entire time." I considered continuing to deny it, but looking at her face, I realized there was no point. She knew, maybe she'd always known on some level, that I wasn't as naive as I pretended to be. "David called me predictable," I said finally. "Boring. Too comfortable." I thought maybe he was right, until I realized that being underestimated was actually an advantage. Her face went white. "You've destroyed our lives." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed your lives. I just documented it. David has lost everything: his job, his reputation, his future. The state bar is opening an investigation. He might be disbarred. He should have thought about that before he decided to use firm resources to conduct an affair. And me? What did I do to deserve losing my job? My reputation? I fell in love with the wrong man. Is that such a crime?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who'd sat at my kitchen table for years, who'd held my hand through my father's cancer diagnosis, who'd helped me pick out my wedding dress. This woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for over a year while pretending to be my closest friend. "You fell in love with my husband," I said quietly, "while pretending to be my best friend. While listening to me worry about our marriage, our future, our problems. You comforted me about David's distance while you were the cause of it. So yes, Melissa, that's exactly the crime you committed." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact instant when she realized that the woman she thought she knew, sweet, trusting Sarah, had never actually existed. "What do you want?" she whispered. I want you to leave my house. I want you to stay away from my husband. And I want you to disappear from my life completely. And if I don't? I smiled, and I must have looked different than she expected, because she actually took a step backward. The documentation I've compiled includes evidence that this affair began before my pregnancy. That means David was cheating on me while we were actively trying to conceive. It also includes evidence that you both discussed ways to manipulate me into a quick divorce, including references to things you know about me that you plan to use as leverage. I'd be very interested to know what those things were, wouldn't you? Her face went from white to green. We wouldn't have, wouldn't you? Because I have emails suggesting otherwise. And while the local newspaper was very professional in their reporting, I'm sure the tabloids would be much more interested in the human interest angle. Best friend steals husband from pregnant woman. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? She was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, please. We never meant for things to go this far. It just happened. And then we couldn't figure out how to stop it. You could have stopped it by not starting it, I said simply. You could have stopped it by being honest with me. You could have stopped it by walking away from my husband and focusing on your own life instead of trying to steal mine. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered. No, it wasn't. You were supposed to get away with it. You and David were supposed to ride off into the sunset while I raised our daughter alone, probably blaming myself for not being enough to keep my husband happy. But that's not how this story ends, Melissa. She looked around my living room, the same room where she'd embraced my husband while planning my future for me, and I could see her taking inventory of everything she was losing. Not just David, but this life, this world we'd all shared. The dinner parties and holiday gatherings, the shared history and inside jokes, the comfortable assumption that she could take whatever she wanted without consequences. I loved him first, she said finally, her voice small and desperate. Maybe you did. But I married him. I built a life with him. I'm carrying his child. And when you decided to interfere with that, you opened yourself up to everything that followed. She nodded slowly, accepting the reality of her situation. What happens now? Now you leave. You find a new job, preferably in a new city. You never contact David again, and you certainly never contact me. In return, I won't release the more personal details of your affair to anyone else who might be interested. And David? David is a grown man who made his own choices. He'll face his own consequences. She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. For what it's worth, Sarah, I am sorry. Not for loving him, but for how we handled it. You didn't deserve that. No, I agreed. I didn't. After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time, feeling the baby move inside me. Strong, definite kicks that reminded me why I'd fought so hard. Not just for revenge, but for justice. For the right to build a life for my daughter that wasn't founded on lies and betrayal. David called that evening. Sarah, we need to talk. Do we? You know we do. I know you're behind what's been happening, the investigation, the newspaper article, everything. I don't know what you mean. Please don't lie to me. Not now. I've lost everything, Sarah. My job, my reputation, probably my career. The state bar investigation could take years to resolve, and even if I'm not disbarred, no firm is going to hire me after this. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? I considered the question seriously. Was I sorry that David's life was falling apart? On one level, yes. I'd loved this man, married him, built dreams around our future together. But he'd thrown all of that away for an affair with my best friend, and then planned to abandon me and our unborn daughter. I'm sorry that it came to this, I said finally. I'm sorry that you made the choices that led to this outcome. But no, David. I'm not sorry that there were consequences for those choices. I need to know what you want from me. What it will take to make this stop. This is as stopped as it gets. Your firm fired you based on their own investigation into your conduct. The state bar is investigating based on evidence of ethical violations that you actually committed. The newspaper reported on public facts. I can't make any of that go away, even if I wanted to. But you could influence things. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that we're working things out. Are we working things out, David? A long pause. I don't know. Maybe, if we could find a way past this. Past what? Past you having an affair with my best friend for over a year? Past you planning to leave me for her? Past you hiding assets and preparing to divorce me while I was pregnant with your child? How did you? He stopped, realizing he'd just confirmed information he didn't know I had. I hired a private investigator, David. I know about the offshore accounts, the LLC, all of it. Did you really think you could steal from me and I wouldn't notice? I wasn't stealing from you. I was protecting assets for our future. Whose future? Yours and Melissa's? Sarah, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, figure out how to rebuild trust. I don't want to rebuild trust with you, David. I want a divorce. The word hung between us like a guillotine blade. I'd said it. After weeks of plotting and planning, of maneuvering us both into position, I'd finally played my final card. A divorce, he repeated numbly. Yes, I want you to file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. I want you to agree to joint custody of our daughter, with primary physical custody going to me. I want the house. I want half of all assets, including the ones you tried to hide, and I want alimony for 5 years. Sarah, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. We don't have to. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, I interrupted. And David? If you try to fight me on any of this, if you try to contest the custody or the financial arrangements, I will make sure that every detail of your affair becomes public record. I'll testify about your emotional abuse, your abandonment of your pregnant wife, your financial misconduct. I'll turn this into the kind of divorce that gets covered in the legal journals as a cautionary tale. You wouldn't. Try me. He was quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke. What about Melissa? What about her? Are you going to destroy her life too? I'm not destroying anyone's life, David. I'm simply making sure that people face appropriate consequences for their actions. Melissa has already lost her job and her reputation. If she stays away from both of us, that's where it ends. And if she doesn't? Then she'll discover that I can be much more creative than either of you gave me credit for. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks before Charlotte was born. David had agreed to all my terms, partly because he had no choice, and partly because his lawyer had made it clear that fighting would only make things worse for him. The state bar investigation was still ongoing, but he'd managed to find work at a small firm across the state, doing insurance defense for a fraction of his previous salary. Melissa had indeed left town, taking a job at a boutique in Denver. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling financially, sharing an apartment with 2 roommates and working retail for the first time in her adult life. I felt a small, cold satisfaction when I heard this, though I told myself it was justice rather than revenge. Charlotte arrived on a rainy Tuesday in November, perfect and healthy and utterly mine. David came to the hospital, awkward and uncomfortable in his new role as part-time father. He held her for exactly 7 minutes, his face unreadable, before handing her back to me. She's beautiful, he said. Yes, she is. She looks like you. I looked down at my daughter, not ours, not anymore, and saw my own eyes looking back at me. She was going to be strong, this little girl. stronger than I'd been, because I was going to teach her to trust her instincts and protect herself from people who would take advantage of her kindness. She looks like herself, I said. David left shortly after, and I didn't see him again for 2 months. He sent child support payments on time and called occasionally to ask about Charlotte. But he'd effectively removed himself from our daily lives, which was exactly what I'd wanted. 6 months after Charlotte was born, I ran into one of David's former colleagues at the grocery store. "Sarah,"